Afukaka is not here this evening. He's here with us in spirit. I just received a WhatsApp from him, wondering if he needed to Skype in. He just got finished with a full day meeting with the city government of the city of Kanorana, not going well. He sent a video that he did last week because he felt very important about this meeting and getting his message to you all. So the Kuikuro made a film about climate change that I'll show you, and he also sent a video that we'll show in a moment. But before that, before I show you the video, I just want to give you a little history of the other people who are here to talk about the work we've been doing with the Kuikuro now for decades. This is Afukaka and I in 1994, and every bit of research that I've done in the Xingu has been hand in hand with Afukaka. He is more than a co-author on all of it. Other folks who are here, Bruna Franchetto will be talking about the linguistic and ethnographic documentation program, the Indigenous education program, and local video program, who made the climate change video. This is Carlos Fausto on the lower left, who's not here with us, but an integral part of the crew, and Weatherby Dorshow from the Puente Institute, who just came down, work we were doing this summer on some very remarkable features that I'll show you in a moment. But let me first show you the film that the Kuikuro made of climate change. excellent use of the drone. I guess truly the Stone Age primitive, frozen at the dawn of time, that is no longer the case. Let me now give you a fukaka. These are questions that I sent for him to answer for us. I'd just like to say it's a remarkable thing, having worked with the Fukaka for 25 years, that we can pull this off, even in his absence, doing the video, doing this interview with the Fukaka, spur of the moment, and literally 10 minutes before we started, he sent in a WhatsApp and said, hey, if you need me, anybody want to ask him some questions? So the rest of us have some very huge shoes to fill, which is to give our side of this story, work that we're involved with every day with the Fukaka. I know it's more boring than...
Just get one of those windows that popped up.
Oh.
A little, yeah.
I wanted to tell you a story about a Fukaka. I met a Fukaka in 1991 for the inauguration. I worked for him for the inauguration of the first Indigenous Association in the Xingu, the Kwakiutl organization that Chief Eritana and a Fukaka and others created. But in 1992, when I was down there working with them on the UN Ecological Conference, he and I were staying together, and we stayed together for many months. And he would ask me for 10 reais in the morning, and then go with his son out on the street. And one day I said, well, can I come with you? And he said, sure. And guess what he was doing with that 10 reais? He was going down to the local padaria, buying a bag of bread, talking to the street children on the corner, and telling them, if you're not loved, if you feel you don't have a place in this world, don't do violence, don't hurt other people, you can come and live in my village. And this is just such a poignant message, both the videos and the interview, and that message for the fact that they are ready for partnerships. They're ready and willing. And so what do we do to create that partnership? Welcome to the Xingu. Welcome to Amazonia. I wanted to make a couple of comments before I get started that really struck me, and Bob mentioned them to me as well, struck him, about some of the comments made today about dialogue and communication. In Dave's discussion, I'm going to invert a little bit the sequence of knowledge management, objectives, and power, and just link up at the very start, knowledge and power. Most of you probably have at least heard the name of Michel Foucault. He made a cabin industry out of joining those two things together. He also made a cabin industry over teaching us about other rationalities, about the fact that it's not irrationality. Some people just simply think differently about the world. And it's worldviews and face as much as anything that we need to deal with. How do we create partnerships? When we talk of speaking truth to power, whose truth? Many of you may also be familiar with the anthropological paradigm of Amerindian perspectivism. Perspectivism, in its original form, meant bringing more eyes, varied eyes, onto a problem and seeing where the common ground was. And I think that's so critically important, these dialogues and communication. And it brings us to those other two issues, the common objectives and the management schemes that we come up to. There's one other point that Dan made about our narratives. Our narratives have to be serious and they need to be detailed, because if you can shoot holes in them, we've lost the battle. So this is how, what do you see there? That is Xingu tropical forest. Does it look natural? Those are anthropogenically modified bands in the forest. So one of the things that we have to deal with is the notion that the Amazon forest is a natural system and humans had a very small impact. Like I say, what you just saw from a Fukaka and the Kuikuro videographers is anything but primitive. They're using drones better than we do. But even in the past, they were doing things that were absolutely remarkable. They're part of the solution, not just part of a human rights problem. They suffer from radical problems. They are in the crosshairs. That's the Xingu right there. Here is a very familiar simulation of what would happen. This is 2006. Things have already changed quite a bit. And this is 2015 from Bertaldo Soares Filho et al. What was not incorporated into that model is climate change. That's 2010, that's 2014, and that's 2015. The centennial drought has become the common climatic pattern. That is an absolutely remarkable thing. In 2005, it was called the centennial drought. Well, when it happened again in 2007 and 2010 and 2014, 15, and 16, in 2016, they had radical forest fires, not outside of the Xingu Park, but right in the middle. And so our great hope that there's going to be patches of forest in protected areas, that may not work out. The very reason we see these is because of Amazonian forest dieback and differential fire going into these systems. I throw this up here just as, again, a representation of what the Amazon is. And we've heard a lot about optimistic scenarios about how we can change deforestation and how we can put it into control. In the southern Amazon, we also have to face a very grim reality. Talvez Amazonia já era. And so what do we do to protect the standing preserves? And this is where I think our focus has to change from the classical, traditional discussion of environmental hotspots to looking for hope spots, socio-ecological hope spots. And in the southern Amazon, that means indigenous areas. We've got to build those partnerships. Fukaká is there ready for us to do that. Another thing that I wanted to point out from this is the way that we characterize biodiversity is oftentimes, look at these two areas. Now, the reason there's no sampling in there is kind of precisely because they're indigenous areas. It's difficult to work in indigenous areas. The fear of the veto power associated with true, free, prior, and informed consent has kept people away. But that's where we need to focus. That's where we need to insert ourselves to create a better picture of what Amazonian biodiversity is in the first place. What is it we're trying to protect? This is an area very high in biodiversity, but in a very specific type of biodiversity. That's species richness. In terms of functional biodiversity, ecosystemic biodiversity, the southern Amazon is actually the hotspot, and it is because of the amazing ways that past human societies coupled with natural systems. Here's one example of that. This is a site, Fazenda Colorado, that Mary Ann kindly brought me to in 1999, the famous geoglyphs of Acre. At that time, Alceo Hanzi brought us to 3. Now there's over 400 of the bloody thing. You just put your finger into the map and show me where there's pristine tropical forest. Well, here's the area that we worked, and as I said, all of this work has been done not only in partnership with the Kuikuro, but also Bruna, Carlos, and other people on this interdisciplinary team. And what we've been able to do is map out, this is probably the best example of what a complex Amazonian society looked like in 1492. And sure enough, this would put ancient Grecian polis to shame in terms of the precision and the regional integration of these societies. And here are our banded forests. These are the core areas. These are all large walled pre-Columbian settlements. That is the ceremonial center. My God, these guys were like urban planners. It's like they had a blueprint of how to deal with things. But the really interesting point is the socio-ecological connectivity that they created through this. And then the banded forests stand at the edges. Now, once again, you just pick a square centimeter on this image and tell me where we should be looking for natural biodiversity. This is cultural heritage. It makes it no less diverse. It makes it no more uninteresting naturally, but we have to recognize that this is the cultural heritage of a Fukaká, This was his ancestors. These happened at a particular point in time. The integration of these large pre-Columbian settlements and the banded forests that happened with them happened to occur in what's called the medieval warming period. That's the highest temperatures got in about the past 3,000–4,000 years. Maybe they were an adaptation to the drier climate. This is what I mean. Indigenous peoples can be part of the solution, as opposed to just looking at them as part of a human rights problem, something that we need to deal with. And it's not just that they know the forest way better, but way better than any of us ever will. But it's because they developed technologies that were specifically adjusted to these environments and capable of adapting to climate change. We did a pollen core right there. This is the Kuikuro village. And we came up with an interesting thing. That's dated at about 5,000 years. It's 20 centimeters. And so we know during the really warm period of the Holocene before us, the current warming period, during the mid-Holocene climatic optimum, as they call it, the Xingu was predominantly grass. It was a savanna. We don't have to talk theoretically about an ecological oscillation. It already happened. We know that. Why didn't it happen here during the medieval warming period, when the villages were huge? And the assumption is, our intuition is, with much larger population, they must have deforested a much broader area. Why? Well, perhaps the answer is the indigenous people had developed technologies and adaptations to that that actually maintained the forest in their place. Back to some banded forests. What were they? We really know they're anthropogenic because of their co-distribution with archaeological sites. They just fit in exactly the right areas. But we also know, based on indigenous knowledge itself, the Kuikuro identify archaeological sites, anthropogenic soils, commonly known as terra preta, as a gepe. They do not identify this particular soil category. It's a gepe, which is a term I came up with. Itsuni is forest. A gepe is anthropogenic forest. But when we went into these bands with them this year, they were in doubt. They were like, oh yeah, it's kind of a gepe. Oh no, it really is more Itsuni. That doubt is because these are also anthropogenic forests. They're not the obvious ones that grow out of terra preta, but they're clearly anthropogenic. We're not the only ones that recognize that climate change is a problem, as you heard from Afukaka. This is Takuma, a now deceased shaman and chief of the Kwakiutl, who said in 2009 that climate change is the only threat since the measles epidemic in 1954 that wiped out 9 out of 10 people in his community. Now, this is an interesting thing because here we are. How do we devise schema, as Tom mentioned, there's actually a win for these folks in the contemporary world, rather than a slow-moving ecological and cultural disaster, a slow loss. And for these folks, a slow loss is 500 years old. They've been fighting this for quite a long time. Here is just an example of the evolution of our project in the Upper Xingu, different stages of it. And like I say, when in 1994, capacities were very different. In 2003, after the United States government turned off selective availability on GPS, you could actually get decent readings. We could do this remarkable mapping. That has changed, and you have seen the place that we've arrived at. For the Kuikuro to pull off a video and an interview and call on WhatsApp because they wanted to be here is a remarkable moment. They are poised to be our partners in defending their lands and our futures. And we're doing this. One of the problems with research in the Amazon, as many of you know, is urgent problems emerge, and to get scientists or other people who can help devise solutions into the area is sometimes a year or 2 process, just getting the authorizations and what. The remarkable thing, these transects that you see here, which we devised in our visit, this is what the Kuikuro are doing on their own. What we also devised with the Kuikuro during that time is mechanisms to recuperate some of their ancient fish farming systems. What they did was with forest was matched in their wetlands. Basically, some of the rivers were fundamentally aquariums. Not a single fish was outside of the range of capture by these ancient populations. These are also potentially fish farming things. And this is just an extension of that, where potentially you can control both water quality, fishing resources, create resources for them to interact with the outside world. I said to them when we were there in a meeting, I said, oh, I felt a little embarrassed for you guys. You know, I've lived with you for 25 years. You guys are the fishing masters. You're the ones who grow manioc, and yet you're buying sacks of manioc flour and frozen fish in town. You should be creating it and selling it to them. It's an idea that went very well. And these technologies, when you articulate them with contemporary technologies, they understand them. They made them. This leads us to one other project that is once again, a mutual project of Fukaka and mine over the years. We got a plot of land back in 1993 in the local town of Panorama. And when we finally got to the point where that land could be donated and we could build something on it, what was their decision in terms of how we build on it? Do we build a brick and mortar structure and make it look like every place is done? No, they created a village in town. This is the mechanism through which they're reaching out to us. They're representing their culture. They're bringing cultures, and it's really been quite remarkable. The Shingu Museum is a place where school groups and tourists can come and witness their culture without having to go into the indigenous area, which creates all kinds of problems. Here are fish holding tanks where you can bring fish in from those fish farming tanks in the area and keep it live in pure water, which any of you know that part of Mato Grosso know that's a very rare commodity. Organic gardens that are created from terra preta, created in their villages, which provides organic crops. Those types of things give them a revenue. So what you just heard from a Fukaka, the government, the national government, the regional government, and the city government, he's been in meetings for 2 weeks straight to try and defend his rights. And what you heard was how he felt last Friday about those meetings. And it's not very good. Here's another element of that we're developing as an idea. How do we bring this out to a broader world? How do we potentially scale this up? How do we bring the Kuikuro views? Well, you just saw an example of that. One of the ideas that we have is through the creation of GIS laboratories and hubs and training mechanisms. One thing that the Kuikuro learn amazingly well is tactile, geographic, graphic information. And that can form a mechanism that allows us to expand beyond the upper Shingu to potentially the entire, in this case, Shingu Protected Corridor. This is a project that I developed with Andre Villas-Boas, Simone Ataiji, and Steve Schwartzman a few years ago to create these ArcGIS hubs in different places along the Shingu. And today we have the technology where you can put that into the hands of everyone. And if you have the indigenous people doing that in a very short time, not only are we going to be able to expand cultural heritage mapping across this entire area, but we have the mechanisms for creating monitoring and management systems that actually make sense to the indigenous people because they helped construct them, but also can bring the best resources to science to do something like scaling up to a simulation that at the moment is based on a little bit of data here, a little bit of data there, a little bit of data there. We need to get into our narratives the best possible practices and information. And on that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Bruno Franchetto.